afternoon, everyone. Yes. Fortunately, we have some very good, interesting talks already done in the pre-lunch session, where most of the issues have been deliberated and discussed amongst us. We have heard many good speakers out over there, and the topic today which we are going to speak is pertaining to the manufacturing sector, as to whether the Indian regulations and Indian legislative issues really help the manufacturing processes or manufacturing sector or not. I would actually put it in two different perspectives to say pain or gain, whether these regulations and whether these Indian legislations work to help the manufacturing sector, whether it is a pain or whether they really help in gain to the sector out over there. And to talk about that, generally we have three very good panelists out over here, excluding me. Rakesh Bhartiya is the CEO of India Glycol, which is a second generation entrepreneurial enterprise in this country. Means we know them all very well. Not part of the Jubilant group, but yes, part of the larger Jubilant family. Jasmeet Vadera represents International Paper, which is a multinational manufacturing organization in the sector of paper manufacturing out over there. Aman is CEO of one of the Dalmia Group's company, Odisha Cement Limited, which is a third generation, I think, well-known industrial family in the country. Means I remember we used to talk of Tata, Birla, Dalmia when we used to talk of the industries in our younger days. So he represents the Dalmia Group out over there. So all three, perhaps we are going to speak, deliberate more into trying to share our experiences and then perhaps open up the floor for everyone to come and talk as much as they want, because many people I see are from the services sector. There are some from the manufacturing sectors as well. So let us try and gain something from our experiences, collective experiences, and then add up with your experiences also, and to see whether really the Indian legislation or Indian regulations has helped them or not. While I was speaking in the morning session, we spoke of some regulatory aspects, whether the regulatory framework in the country is good enough or not. That was one aspect, and we saw the examples coming from the telecom and the power sector, and to speak that whether it should be micromanaging, it should be doing a soft managing or something of that nature, whether the regulator should really get into that sector or not. That's one. Second aspect is whether really there needs to be more changes or more reforms to help the manufacturing sector, especially the labor reforms, which we have been hearing about a lot out over there. The taxation is good enough for both the services and manufacturing. Labor is really directly impacting the manufacturing segment out over there. And lastly, whether there needs to be something unique which should be brought out for the purpose of facilitating the Make in India program, which is being the talk of the town at the current moment out over there. So from these three perspectives, let us try and see how we can gain from the experiences of each one of us, and then perhaps move forward in trying to get into a small debate or a discussion amongst us. We will perhaps not spend more than 5 to 7 minutes each on the topics, and then we will open the floor and we'll try to manage everything in 45 minutes of time. So may I first ask Rakesh, you to come and just share your thoughts to see. India Glycol is a very niche sort of a manufacturing organization. So keeping that in mind, do you really think that Indian legislative regime or the framework is good enough or not? Whether you really feel the pain of those impediments of the legislation coming to block your growth, or really it helps you to move forward in a bigger directions? Over to you.
Thank you, Rajendraji. Good afternoon, everybody. I must admit, one of the reasons why I agreed to attend this panel was I thought this could be a good opportunity to enjoy the dal bukhara on a weekday, and which I did. So I made sure I was here in time for the lunch. And before we started, I was also checking with Rajendraji, what is the tone that I need to take? Should I need to be dead honest, brutally honest, or diplomatically honest? Now, he said that he's always been diplomatically honest. Sorry, brutally honest. He's always been brutally honest. Now, I think I'll be diplomatically honest. So I'll start by saying that today the theme across the country is Make in India. And appropriately, I think the theme of this conference has also been termed as Make in India to Succeed. And all of us want this campaign, vision, whatever you may choose to call it, to succeed. Now, is there something new in it? Not really. I think all of us across the years have been reading that Make in India is something which needs to happen. I think somewhere over the last 15, 20 years, we lost some sense of direction. Fortunately, with the new government in place, with a visionary prime minister in place, I think we've come back on track. I'll share my experiences. As he pointed out, presently I'm the CEO of India Glycol, which is a niche specialty chemical manufacturing company. I've had an experience in a manufacturing company before this job, which was a commodity company, but far more closely interfaced with the government as well as the common man, the farmer. I was the CEO of a sugar company, and prior to that, believe it or not, I was a banker. So I thought that I made the right move by quitting banking in 2006 and joining manufacturing. Little did I realize that's the biggest mistake that I made. Because when you join manufacturing, you realize how difficult life is for, I think, anybody operating in a manufacturing company in India. Now, you actually start wondering, why should you be in manufacturing at all? And that's the initial thought that comes to you, I think, particularly when you join from banking into manufacturing. But are things really that bad? Yeah, could be, because all of us keep reading more and more negatives. Having said that, we have, within the country, some huge successes. So let me just share a few of my experiences, and that would give you a perspective of what can be done right. You know, compliance is becoming a bigger challenge for all companies in India. So you have the independent directors on the board who are becoming far more sensitive simply because for the first time even they are facing the heat. So we decided to appoint a consultant and do an inventory of how many statutes that India Glycols needs to comply with on a regular basis. And the number was 42. So across our corporate office, our manufacturing locations, the total number of acts that we needed to comply with was 42. We drilled it down further to look at the rules and the compliances that we need to do within each act. And the basic idea was to get a dashboard made at the corporate office level to make sure that all compliances are being done in time. And believe me, by the end of that exercise, we decided not to have the dashboard because we realized that you are bound to have certain acts of omission. And the last thing that you wanted to do was have those acts of omission be used against you. So we went back to our Excel spreadsheet. Now, you can argue it that was the right thing to do. I think given the current setup, we possibly thought that the most prudent thing to do. Because the minute you have a dashboard, information is easily available, you cannot manipulate the dashboard, etc., etc. But that's the degree of compliances that a manufacturing company like ours needed to do. And we have 3 manufacturing locations. Now let's look at again pollution. Now this is something, right now I'm a little more actively involved in behalf of the industry. I'm the president of Indian Chemical Council. And so after this government came in, they wanted to understand from us that what is it that they should be doing different. And again, there was a huge debate within the executive committee of the Indian Chemical Council that should we go to the government with a laundry list of 50 items that they need to do, or should we filter it down and make it more practical for them to do things in a short period of time. And I'll just take one example. When you go to the pollution authorities to run your plant, you get a consent to operate. Today, you get a consent to operate for 1 year, which essentially means that you have set up an asset where the payback period would be 15 years, 20 years, but as a company, you do not know at the end of 12 months, can you continue to run your operations or not? So our simple request was that as per the statute, the pollution officers, they possibly have more easier access to the plant than even the chairman of the company. The chairman still possibly has to sign in, take a visitor's pass, etc. They don't. They simply walk in. So if that's the kind of unrestricted access they have to inspect, why don't you give a consent to operate for 3 years? If not 5, if not 7. And we haven't seen any positive feedback yet. And all of you can understand that by having an annual requirement to get this renewed, what it entails. It's a challenge, and it's an avoidable challenge. Having said that, now let me just change gears. So on one hand, we have regulations which are overwhelming, burdening, and like I said, we can keep complaining that there are just too many of them. I guess you have to tackle them, manage them to move along. From a chemical industry perspective, we are actually approaching the government to have a regulation. Can you believe it? Today, when you look at chemical products, there's literally no chemical inventory of chemicals that get used or consumed in India. There is no inventory. In our country, we do not know what kind of chemicals are being consumed for which product. And we've been chasing the government to say that get an inventory of chemicals, get an inventory of chemical companies manufacturing in India so that you have some framework of what product can get used. And so far, while we've taken a baby step in terms of giving a mandate to get a chemical inventory done, we do not have a chemical regulation. We need to see this in the context of what's happened in Europe particularly. They have a regulation which forces you to get your chemical product, if it's being sent to Europe or consumed in Europe, get it registered. That registration costs anywhere between 100,000 euro to 200,000 euro. Fortunately, Europe is depreciating. So at least in rupee terms, that cost is coming down. But these are the kind of barriers that other markets have imposed. We need to do the same. If we have to make manufacturing succeed in India, we have to do exactly what other markets are doing to protect their markets. So we need regulations, and we need them fast. Having said all this, am I running out of? Having said all this, I think somewhere even the corporate sector needs to do a course correction. I think we have grown up in an environment where managing the environment was the easiest thing to do. Are we in a similar kind of setup? We are not. I think companies have grown large. As Rajendraji pointed out, my fellow panelist, the company to which I belong, I think all of us must have started as entities with turnover of 40 crores, 50 crores. Today, each one of us are having top lines of 1,000 crores plus, multiples, 1,000 crores and multiples of that. Can we afford to run our businesses in the manner in which we did 20 years back, 30 years back? We cannot. Given that perspective, it's also equally important that corporates step up, become more compliant, because there are regulations out there which are healthy for the economy, like the Competition Act. I think today, if that act is implemented appropriately, I think it could change the way, in many ways, that businesses are done. So the onus is on us to ensure compliance as a corporates. The onus is on the government to introduce legislation where it's needed. And last but not the least is to eliminate legislation which is just simply there for the heck of it. Thank you.
I'm going to start by saying that there are only 3 challenges that a manufacturing industry faces today. One is to start a business, second is to close a business, and third is to run it in between. Right? So, let's talk about each of these actually. When you start a business, right? Why should you start a business in India? Right? I think there is every conceivable reason to come to India. There's a very good positive story on demographics. We have a young population, very productive, finding new and better employment opportunities every day, having great purchasing power, and aspiring to live a quality of life that Western countries are known for. India ranks number 2 in the population. There's no hidden fact there. We'll probably grow very soon to become the world number 1 in that area. Our middle class out of this is actually today about 250 to 60 million people. Right? It's that many people to sell your products to. So the market itself is a great selling story for India. And this middle class population is poised to grow almost to double this number in the next 10 years. So by 2025, we are expecting about 548 million the middle class. And the middle class, by the way, in the statistics is any family earning between 3.4 lakhs to 17 lakhs an annum, right? So that it's that much purchasing power for products, commodities, goods and services for companies to come and avail business opportunities here. But on the other hand, if you look at the population in terms of its productivity and engagement in the economic cycle, right, only about 40% of this population actually belongs to the labor force. And when you come to women, actually the statistics is even more abysmal. About 23% of women in the country are actually engaged in economic activity in the labor force. And that contrasts to say 67% of China, which is our closest neighbor and has been a hallmark in the manufacturing area. And this labor force, by the way, is growing about 6 lakhs a month in the last couple of years, and is poised to grow about 10 lakhs a month in the next 15-year time frame. And this workforce does need opportunities to be engaged and in turn also generate purchasing power for goods and commodities. I also saw statistics coming into Delhi this morning. IMF has released statistics that we're probably going to be the fastest growing economy this year. Of course, there's a lot of statistical changes that has gone into this number, but it's mainly also because our neighbor China is slowing down massively this year. But 7.2% is a fairly large number, right? It's that much GDP that we are going to add in 1 year. Unfortunately, on the other hand, if you look at statistics on ease of doing business, right, we're ranked about 142. And that number is all out of 189 countries in the World Bank's report, actually. And that number is also kind of a misnomer because on 1 or 2 counts which go into the statistics, we are very, very good. We are in the single-digit numbers. But let me share with you some of the numbers of specific parts of the statistics. On enforcing contracts, we are number 186 out of 189. On paying taxes, we are 156 out of 189. On construction permits, we are 184. On getting electricity, we are 137. And on trading overseas, export and imports, we are 126. Right? Now this is an abysmal figure. Right? This is how much our structure of regulations, our bureaucracy, our legal systems. This is how much they support growth and nurturing of businesses in India, right? Of course, the current dispensation, the government is very heavily focused. It's one of their key objectives in the commerce and economic space to improve this ranking. And I believe the objective goal that they've set for themselves is about 50 very soon. I hope they achieve it. So let's start with just understanding what kind of complex legal systems we deal with. When you start a business, right? Let's say when you want to set up a company in India, right? You start with thinking about employees in the company, thinking about an office of that company, thinking about a legal structure like a corporate structure. So you have to get DIN. For directors, you have to get a digital signature for them. You have to get a name reservation. You got to pay stamp duties. You got to obtain a certificate of commencement of business. You got to have PAN, TAN for your income taxes. For PF, you need a separate registration. For VAT, you need a separate registration. For excise and service tax, you need a separate registration. For ESI, you need a separate registration. You need property registrations as well, right? Profession tax, and the list just goes on and on and on, right? And that just, is to start and the business just to get the feet on the ground. Probably at just a visualization of the business plan or a strategic planning stage of a business. And then let's look at factories, right? Rakesh touched upon that a little bit, but I'm going to talk about when you start a factory, what kind of pain you go through. So you have environmental clearances, various stages of environmental clearance, right from submitting an environmental report, engaging experts, and then going into public hearing, remedial actions, different stages of approvals in the state committees or the central committees. You need a factories license, and whoever said license Raj has gone, is clearly probably a victim of a PR exercise of the government, right? You need, approvals of your plants in the factories, again from the Factories Inspectorate. You need SSI registration if you are a small-scale industry. You need contract labor to engage, labor. You need excise and service tax. You need boiler, registration and regular, inspections. If you have even a wireless, use within your premises, you need a wireless registration. Interstate migratory workmen need a separate registration. If you have a lift, unfortunately, in the premises, you would need a separate license for that. Petroleum, if you store it on your premises, you will need a license. If you have anything hazardous or explosives, you will need a license, right? Legal metrology, food, if you serve in a cafeteria. Just this list is absolutely endless, right? In fact, we are not even a regulated industry in paper, unlike, say, pharma sector or, other industries which are heavily regulated. And we drew up a list of compliances that we need to, manage on a daily basis. And that list runs into 6,000. So that it is that many tasks that you need to fulfill, whether it's record keeping, submitting returns, forms, obtaining licenses, or, displaying of certain extracts of laws and whatnot. 6,000. Just imagine the amount of resources that it takes to manage these compliances and the costs involved, right? That itself probably is the single most biggest factor to make us uncompetitive in the manufacturing space, right? And of course, Rajendra ji spoke about deemed approval, and we have very, very smart people in our regulatory bodies, in our bureaucracy. They spend a lot of time studying for the IAS, and we know how tough that exam is to crack and all of that. So they find very nice ways of getting across from these statutory regulations. So you may have a single window system, or you may have a deemed approval system, but it works, it can just be derailed by one piece of paper asking a query or asking for clarification or asking for further documentation. And we all have been victims of that, right? We are an international company, so we also engage expats. And, I cannot tell you how much of a nightmare it is to engage an expat in India, right? We end up paying almost double of their salaries because, we have to top up their provident fund, which cannot be recovered till the person attains 58 years of age, and that is only recoverable on a personal basis. And then when an expat gets into India, the visa and the FRRO registration issues, such a nightmare, right? And then there are taxation issues, whether you're creating a PE or not, and what kind of contracts do you offer to them, and it's just a crazy experience. So the other thing that you have to also see is that the legal system and also the current economic policy, although the stated objective of that is to support Make in India, but there is really nothing that has been brought in the budget this year, or which has been introduced in the change of law systems that the government has been planning, which actually supports that, right? Which is kind of contradictory to the stated objectives. And then, you have the grassroots corruption, right? You're dealing with bureaucracy. Corruption is an inevitable subject to deal with. So we need a great Swachh Bharat movement actually on the corruption itself, right? Not on the streets probably, right, to start with. And then when we come to closure of a business, we all know Nokia example. We have some colleagues from Microsoft, who deal with their Nokia acquisition, and colleagues on the other side as well. Fortunately, they probably left out that factory out of the deal, so they are better off now. But look at how painful we make it to close a business. There are tax clearances. If you have more than 100 employees, you need the government's approval even to fire one person. And then you have the union issues, right, who are highly politicized, as we know, right? So these are very, very difficult challenges. So starting business itself is a problem. Exiting business, God, forbid. I hope nobody of you in the audience ever has to go into that territory. How do we change all of this? I would suggest, there are a two-pronged approach. One, we need structural reforms, right? Reforms on labor. My colleagues spoke about that earlier, and with a big focus on skill development. Because although we have a great labor force in India, great in numbers, but the employability of the labor force in India is abysmal, right? The amount of skills they have, the amount of development that can go into those people, or productivity levels are so low compared to worldwide standards. Right? So, and now fortunately we have huge amount of finances with the government, with the education cess and whatnot to put behind these plans. But I think labor reforms coupled with skill development programs would be a key reform. And then, we of course have the land reforms. I think, Aman, you were talking about that. And, tax reforms as well, GST and other initiatives. And the second area would be encouraging the investments. Now today there may be some incentives for exports, for example, right? You may have the EPCG scheme or others which encourage import of capital equipment going into manufacturing process. There's really nothing for domestic market, for encouraging manufacturing in domestic market. There has been an announcement about Andhra and Bihar and one other state getting some incentives, which we really need to see the light of the day. So thanks very much for the patient listening. I'm happy to take any other questions as well during the session. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Rajendra. I just give you a reality check. When I joined this industry about 9 years back, company was on an aggressive growth phase, and I joined as a group head of HR. I worked with my boss, who's a managing director, and he told me, let's hire a CEO. And I was discussing with him to write the job specifications of a CEO. What is the job role and what is the kind of competencies required. The first thing I thought would be business acumen. And the first thing which the MD said, ability to manage regulatory framework. I said, are we hiring a, corporate affairs head? He said, that's the second point. Must have worked as a corporate affairs head in a large manufacturing company. I said, well, I came from Bosch and Lomb. I used to sell contact lenses, a very posh industry, and all of a sudden in manufacturing. So he said, if you want to learn the tricks of the trade, he put me, after a couple of years, he put me as head of corporate affairs also. So I was heading HR and corporate affairs. And I was touching 16 states as those days, and I had the fortunate to work with Rajendra for a while at that time. And when I joined the company, first project which we conceptualized, from the day Mr. Darmian decided that we need to put up this project, if I remember correctly, within 2 years we broke the ground, and within 4 years we commissioned the project. Rather than 3 years we commissioned the project, 1.5 years. Today, in cement sector, if at all you dare to start a project, it takes anything from 5 years to 10 years when you can start actually construction at that site. Welcome to Make in India. That's the ground reality. Second thing, the Land Acquisition Act. Very hotly debated nowadays. I'm sure most of you from the legal fraternity would have studied the new act, the renaming of it, the essence behind that, and so on and so forth. Industry is ready to take the additional cost burden of acquisition of land. Why? In a large manufacturing industry, the cost of land used to be typically 4 to 5% of the project cost. With this, regulation change, it might lead to 12%, 3 times, 4 times, 16%. But if your incubation period gets cut down from 12 years to say 2 years, look at the firmness, or look at the predictability, accuracy or predictability of business plan with which you are putting up that project. Today you conceptualize a project and the project comes on stream 12 years down the line. The total economics of the project has undergone a change. The road from where you thought that you will ferry the cement has become so congested that you can't move a cycle from there rather than a truck. So the project has gone for a 6 anyways. So it is better to put that much of cost on the project if there is a certainty. Because business is so uncertain and ambiguous in our situation that any amount of additional cost, if it brings a certain amount of certainty to the project, people are ready to take it. But the problem is that even in the current Land Acquisition Act, the fair and remunerative compensation, it is so ambiguous, and it is left to the district collector based on the registrations done in the recent past, etc. So I think it's a circle rate, and so let's see how does it come to play. Another very important regulation, which my co-panelist also mentioned, Mr. Bhartiya also mentioned about the consent to operate. The genesis of, prior to that, at setting up the project, you need an environment clearance. And within environment clearance, you need forest clearance. Within forest clearance, you need wildlife management plan clearance. Now, that's okay. But there is a case. We got a mining lease done. We got the environment clearance done 20 years back. The case comes for renewal. In the intervening period, the environment clearance regulation undergoes a change. Forest, embedded in that Forest Clearance Act, undergoes a change because of directions of the Supreme Court, and that becomes a part of the law. Then there is a Forest Act embedded in that, which is supplemented with the Forest Rights Act. Now, all this is happening when your lease is coming for renew. The net impact was that in spite of that forest having been alienated for this mining lease 20 years back, the re-alienation of the same piece of land through the same regulation took us 5 years, which we started, in anticipation we started in advance, but still the plant was closed for 3 months, resulting in a financial impact of more than 100 crores directly onto the company. That's the cost of compliance or the regulation change in a small company of, say, about 2,000 crore turnover. So that particular year we had a hit of 100 crores only on account of this particular issue, right? Now, ease of doing index, my colleague dwelt in detail, very easy for anybody to make a sense. Which e-commerce site would you transact business with? Where you have to make 10 clicks to make a project, or where to make a purchase, or where you have to make 2 clicks? Why Ola cab is more famous than Meru cab today? 1 click, your cab is booked, right? Single window is that. Not single window. In India, unfortunately, single window is one more window in front of 20 windows. Because through the window, then it goes to the 20 windows, and where you have to follow up again, right? Now, you wanted us to be candidly honest and brutally honest. I'll give you a brutally honest anecdote. We went for a wildlife approval plan, wildlife management plan. The plan which came on my table for a final review and submission, I saw it's a 4 crore submission deposit to the government, which if the plan is cleared with the government, we will require 4 crores to be deposited to the government. So let me see what is that 4 crore going into. I thought it will be going into the betterment of elephants and zebras in that area. 5 lakhs for buying a Scorpio for the forest rangers. 3 lakhs for upgradation of IT infrastructure in the forest office. 2 lakhs for high resolution cameras. Like that, all the infrastructure of the government office was being put onto the industry which was trying to be compliant on that score. And it was a 4 crore total budget. Out of which, if I remember correctly, 150 lakhs was on improving the infrastructure of the government, which has nothing to do with us at that particular junction. Now, what can then our colleagues in legal or compliance do to help the businesses to navigate through such fuzzy environment? One thing I have seen with a very competent legal team in our company is that they have been proactively able to guide us that this is the regulation which is coming, and this will be its implication on this aspect of the business. Hence, this is what you need to do. Right? So that's one very big role the legal team has been able to play for us. Second thing, I think one of the panelists here or in the previous session said, the letter and spirit of law, right? The general counsels rather, which I have experienced in a company, including Rajendraji, have been wise men who have been able to understand that a sense of law, why this framework is, why this regulation is framed in the first place. And hence, how should it play out if you're imposing or regulating authority or administrative authority is imposing it in a way which is in contradiction to the basic essence of a law? How do you bring him around on making him understand the essence of the law and hence following that? So that's a huge thing. We have got tremendous benefit on interpretation of MMLD Act in some of the leases which we are fighting with. And believe you me, it is only the able guidance of our general counsels that they were able to understand the essence of the law and hence how should we prepare our case and proceed that we were able to come about it. The third part, which is very relevant in today's context, is what you said during running of the business. And thanks. Starting of the business, during running of the business, the compliances are numerous. I was just trying to get a number because you were saying 42, something like that to begin, right? If I remember correctly, when we were putting up a particular project, the total number of clearances which my team had put up there was 160 odd. Including, can you imagine a plant getting put up for 2,000 crores? The drawing of that has to be cleared by local panchayat. I mean, with all due respect to our, panchayat members and sarpanches, do you think he would have any idea that what will it need to this drawing being compliant to the requirements? So that is the kind of number we have. So I think if for a running concern, I got a calendar yesterday from one of my friends who runs a CA firm. On each page, he has mentioned that by this date, this report has to go. So on March 15th, let us say advanced tax has to go and all that. And it is only from financial taxation angle. I was surprised. You know what? Each calendar page had at least 3 or 4 reports to be submitted to the government. And I said, that day I realized that my finance team really works well. But I tell you, if you put all the compliances required by the company in a month together, then like you were saying that the number of people you have in the compliance, not only the regulatory framework, like one day I counted that how many MIS people I have in my company. It was 120. And I can assure you, if you count the people who are working only on the compliances for a 2,000, 4,000 crore company, it will not be less than a couple of hundreds. The total set of people who are working purely on compliance, आज CTO लेने जाना है, आज लेबर लाइसेंस रिन्यू करवाना है, फैक्ट्री लाइसेंस रिन्यू करवाना है, PF के लिए जमा करवाने जाना है, ESC के लिए जाना है, आज टैक्सेशन के लिए जाना है, इसके लिए, look at, probably that is the way for us to create jobs. So we have a large population to cater to. So I think this is what my experiences have been in working with the regulatory framework. Thank you.